Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of dyslexicconnect.com's online dyslexia blog. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the common symptoms of dyslexia. And because there are so many, I'm actually going to split this into two parts. I'm going to have part one and part two for both the dyslexic or the symptoms of reading, the dyslexia symptoms of reading, and also the common signs of dyslexia with spelling. I'm going to do both of those separately and split them up a little bit because there are so many different signs. First of all, when we're talking about the symptoms of dyslexia, it's very important to understand that dyslexia occurs in different degrees and with different symptoms in different people. I talked about that a little bit in my last video, and if you haven't watched that, you might want to go ahead and watch that first, the video about the different degrees of dyslexia. The reason it's important to understand this is if we're going to recognize dyslexia and know when we see it, we have to realize that we're not always going to see the same signs in each dyslexic individual. For example, if we took 10 different symptoms of dyslexia, we may see 5 of them with one individual, but not the other 5, and then we may go to another student and see those 5 that we didn't see in the previous student. So it's very important to understand that, because we may see any different combination of dyslexic symptoms in different students. We may see these 3, but not these other ones. We may see, these 5. But if you come to understand what the signs of dyslexia are, then you can typically recognize it in any form and degree that you see it in, which is extremely helpful. Dyslexia specialists get very good at doing this because they see these signs on a regular basis. Dyslexia tutors do as well because they work with dyslexic students all the time and see these signs in the different forms and the different degrees of dyslexia. The first thing we'd like to start out with today, I think, is talking about one of the major signs of dyslexia that is also fairly rare. So I think the most stereotypical sign of dyslexia that people usually associate with dyslexia is writing and reading words backwards. So for example, if you ask a dyslexic student, in this case, to write the word cat, instead of writing C-A-T, they may write T-A-C, write the thing completely backwards, or they may also write it upside down with completely upside down letters. Similar to that, if you ask them to read a word, the word cat, for example, they may read it backwards and say tack, like that instead. Now, this is a sign of dyslexia, but unfortunately, a lot of people think this is the only identifying signature of dyslexia, when in fact, it's fairly rare, and we don't tend to see it all that much in dyslexia tutoring. I've been tutoring dyslexics for probably about 10 years or so, and to tell you the truth, I've hardly ever worked with students that do this on a regular basis. I have seen students that have very, very profound dyslexia that do this sometimes, that will spell a word completely backwards. They may take the word cat and spell it as T-A-C, but that has been very rare, and I tend to see the other symptoms of dyslexia much more often and much more consistently than I do that other one. And unfortunately, that one symptom tends to be the one that all people are familiar with if they haven't worked with dyslexics before or read up on dyslexia. And so if they see a student who's having problems, they may just simply look for that one sign, and if that sign's not there, they may say, well, they're clearly not dyslexia. They're not dyslexic. So they would say, well, they don't read words backwards, they don't write words backwards, so they're not dyslexic. And that's unfortunate because, as I mentioned, that's a fairly rare symptom of dyslexia, one that we don't see very often. And there are many other symptoms that we see a lot. So let's start talking about those, the ones that are very common that we tend to see a lot. One of the very common signs of dyslexia is when children or adults with dyslexia forget words. So, for example, if they are reading a word on a page and they may read it correctly the first time, then suddenly they get to the next page, they forget the same word. And this one tends to frustrate parents a lot because if they're reading with their children, they may say, oh, what in the world is going on? You remembered this word, you read this word correctly just one page ago, and suddenly they get to the next page and they've forgotten it completely. It's a very common sign of dyslexia. Another very common sign is when students have a difficult time reading or sounding out words in isolation. So that means that they have a difficult time sounding out words according to what they see. They may know the phonetic sounds or they may not, but they really have a difficult time when you put a word in isolation in front of them and say, okay, go ahead and read that. They either don't know how to sound it out correctly, or they're just simply unwilling and they get frustrated if you ask them to do that. This is another very common sign. Because of this reason, in our online tutoring with Dyslexia Connect, we use words in isolation a lot. This is one of the things that really helps students get more comfortable with sounding out words and learn to apply what they're learning in tutoring. They start to get used to tackling words, and this gives them more and more confidence in the ability to sound difficult words out when they see them. Another sign of dyslexia can be just difficulty learning phonetic sounds. So if a child has a hard time learning the sounds that letters make, letter combinations make, this is a very common symptom. And you may try to help them learn these sounds. You may get some flashcards or have them work with something else to say, learn the sound of A, for example, and they may learn it and be able to repeat it, but they come back to the next day and they've completely forgotten it. This is very, very common, trouble learning basic sounds or even more complex sounds for phonics. This is one of the reasons we address this a lot during tutoring, because this is something that's very important to learn how to read words and to spell words better and to improve in those areas. So that is very common. Difficulty with phonics, difficulty acquiring sounds, difficulty holding on to sounds. And this can be basic sounds all the way up to more complex sounds, combinations like O-U-G-H saying aw, different things like that, for example. That's another common sign. Another big one is reading accuracy. Students with dyslexia who have not had dyslexia tutoring tend to have a hard time with reading accuracy. If you have them read something out loud, they may make all kinds of mistakes. They might forget words, first of all, leave words out in sentences as they're reading them. They might add extra words into the sentence that aren't present. So words like to, at, for, different things like that. They may add words in, leave words out. They also may flip the word order sometimes. They may be reading a sentence and instead of reading, the first word that comes first, they'll flip that and put another word that comes after it first. That's also very common. And in terms of that reading accuracy, of course, that also has to do with the ability to sound words out and willingness to sound words out. They typically, when they're reading, they'll just brush over something. They tend to guess a lot. They guess at a lot of words and just sort of brush over words and go right on to the end of the sentence, even though they have not read the sentence accurately. In the same sense, when dyslexics read, they tend to ignore punctuation a lot. So if they're reading along in a sentence and there's a period, dyslexics will often just simply ignore it and they'll go right through. They tend to not leave breaks at all when they read commas. And this results in a dyslexic's reading out loud being difficult to understand because it doesn't have the right rhythm to it since they're ignoring punctuation. They may ignore a period and instead of stopping and taking a breath and then going on, they just simply go right through. So it tends to make the sentences jumble up and be hard to understand for somebody that's listening to the dyslexic read. It's a very common thing. Reading accuracy is a big issue. Another thing is reading is typically very tiring for a dyslexic. They feel that reading is tough for them. Often they don't want to read because reading is a difficult thing. And if you have them read, they get tired very quickly because they're spending so much time just focusing on trying to decode words, and yet they don't really know how to decode words if they haven't had proper training so far. And reading is just exhausting for them. And so as a result, they tend to avoid reading and try to avoid it at all costs. In school, at home, they tend to not read for fun. And that's one of the major signs. And this is especially a strong indicator of dyslexia when you have a child who's obviously intelligent and curious about things. A child like that should naturally want to read and enjoy reading and look forward to learning different things by reading books. If they don't, then that's another very obvious sign of dyslexia. So those are some of the major signs of dyslexia. As I mentioned, with dyslexic individuals, we don't necessarily see all of these at once. We may see a couple of them here, a couple of them there, and it's very, very important to understand that. But those are some of the very major signs, and I guess I'm going to end this video here right now, but in the next episode I'm going to talk about some more typical symptoms of dyslexia. Since there are so many, I would like to share all the major ones so that you can be aware of them, and I'll share more of those next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to make a comment in the comments section. You can also visit us at our website, www.dyslexiaconnect.com. If you're interested in learning more about dyslexia or contacting us about our online tutoring program, or just like to have a look around, please feel free to visit us. Thanks and have a great day.